Hey guys, Confirm here. Happy Halloween! I hope you all are having a great spooky month. Last year, I did a special matchup for Christmas, so this year I figured I'd do a spooky matchup for the spooky season. One between two indie games that I am a huge fan of. The Devil from Cuphead versus the Snatcher from Hat In Time. Today, I'll be seeing which one of these soul-stealing scumbags would win a one-on-one fight. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like, subscribe, as these take a ton of effort to make, and I make a lot of stuff like this on the channel. Feel free to comment down below who you think is going to win and why, and feel free to drop suggestions for matchups down below or in my Discord. Of course, a quick spoiler warning for both of these franchises. With that out of the way, seeing as I've already briefly covered Cuphead on the channel, let's start with the devil himself.
In case you ain't heard, I'm the devil.
The devil is the final boss of Cuphead, being the catalyst to the game's plot after tricking Cuphead and Mugman into gambling their souls away, forcing them to collect the soul contracts of various characters in Inkwell Isle. Before we start, there's a lot that I need to clarify for this guy. Firstly, a surprising amount of people seem to think that just because he's the devil in the Cuphead verse, he scales to the actual devil from the Bible, which is not how that works, like at all. Also, there's the question of what material should be used and what's canon. Obviously, the original game and its DLC are canon, but the show and comics are a little more ambiguous. The ending of the show seems to set it up as a prequel, but the creators have also stated the show is a separate story. For this video though, since personally I think it makes this specific matchup more interesting, I'm gonna pick what I want and do a soft composite of the devil, which basically means I'm granting the devil everything, aside from like crossovers and stuff, because y'all ain't ready for Geico scaling. Starting off with his attack potency, in the show, the devil is able to burn down a large portion of a forest, which has been calculated to require over 70 tons of TNT, enough energy to destroy an entire city block. And that's pretty much the biggest feat the devil himself shows, but due to being the final boss, being determined to be powerful beyond worlds, and being the goddamn devil, he should upscale pretty much every other character and feat in the verse, which I will list now. Chef Saltbaker was able to create a blast that completely destroys the building his fight takes place in, requiring over 100 tons of TNT, a multi-city block level feat. Rim Magic might have created a storm during a phase transition that was calculated to around 35 kilotons of TNT, a town level feat. Glumstone the Giant, due to just being a mountain-sized guy, has a GPU over a megaton of TNT, and that's where the game consistently caps, but there are some way higher ends that come to the other material. For example, in the show, Cuphead was able to throw a rope to the moon and pull on it, which was calculated to require 378 yotatons of TNT. For reference, that's enough energy to destroy the Earth 6,000 times over. However, for the verse's highest ends, we can look to the comics, where Mortimer Freeze was able to cast a cold spell that was not only able to cover the entirety of Inkwell Isle in snow, but was also able to freeze the sun itself, which can get anywhere from brown dwarf to even small star levels of AP. And that's the highest that the devil gets in terms of AP, but there are some jank arguments that get him higher, like the multi-solar system ends, which come from characters seemingly creating dimensions of starry skies, though these instances are all pretty weird and have much more likely explanations. Stars appear in the background of Hildeberg's final phase, but this is obviously meant to be the night sky appearing after the sun sets. Jimmy the Great appears to have a dimension with the starry sky within his sarcophagus, but it's very unlikely that anyone scales to this. We don't know if Jimmy actually created this dimension never actually gets destroyed, and there's actually some evidence that the sarcophagus is actually a window to the astral plane. Not only does it look extremely similar, but Jimmy was directly stated to be tied to the astral plane by the lead designer of Student MDHR in an interview. So it is possible that Jimmy scales to this realm, but it is very unlikely and would need more direct evidence to be usable. Speaking of the astral plane, this dimension is at least multi-solar system level, possibly much higher, but nobody scales to it, since Chef Saltbaker's plan to gain control over it using the Wondertart was foiled due to him needing a soul to bake it. Alright, let's move on to speed, which is actually pretty simple, as the devil pretty much just scales to all of Cuphead's feats due to being able to keep up with him in combat. Cuphead can dodge cannonballs at over 300 meters per second, a transonic feat, but also can avoid attacks reminiscent of lightning, as well as being able to dodge it in the comics. If we assume that these attacks move at speeds similar to actual cloud-to-ground lightning, this would grant him speed anywhere from Mach 1000 to Mach 1800, granting him massively hypersonic scaling. At best though, there is an argument for FTL to even MFTL scaling, which once again comes from Mortimer Freeze freezing the sun with his magic. However, this argument makes some pretty hefty assumptions, like assuming that Mortimer's magic had to physically travel to the sun in a short time frame, and that anyone scaled this to reaction speed. Combat and attack speed aren't necessarily correlated, Mortimer never uses a spell similar to this in a combat setting, and nobody was able to react to this spell, so there isn't really evidence that the devil would scale to this. Moving on to his abilities and hacks, being from a franchise heavily inspired by Riverhill's cartoons, the devil has a lot of hacks thanks to his Toon Force. He can stretch his limbs and shapeshift into pretty much anything. He can even survive ripping all the flesh off his bones and regrow everything in a matter of seconds. seconds. He can manipulate energy, electricity, and fire, teleport himself and others, fly, create illusions, grant life, use telekinesis, summon a variety of objects and minions, and even kill people with the smoke that fucking kills you. However, a lot of his hacks abilities are actually from his pitchfork, which can be stolen, rendering him a lot less versatile. And of course, there's his most iconic ability, his soul manipulation, which allows him to physically interact with and steal souls. He's been doing this for at least 3,000 years, and has ownership of over 6 billion souls, so it's safe to say that he's pretty experienced. And that's all of his innate abilities, but he has a lot of equipment too that we should talk about. Of course, there's his aforementioned pitchfork, but he has some other things for the comics, like beer bottles that steal your soul, cigars that instantly kill you, and playing cards that can lock you into purgatory. So overall, the devil would scale to small city level at the low end, large planet level at mid end, and star level at absolute best, with transonic to mass supersonic speeds. So, how does that compare to the Snatcher? Snatcher is the main antagonist of Chapter 3 of Hat In Time, The Subcon Forest, and a major antagonist of the game as a whole. Long ago, he used to be the prince of a village that lived with his lover Queen Vanessa. However, after a misunderstanding took place, he was killed and became the murderous vengeful spirit that rules over the Subcon Forest, the Snatcher. Getting right into his scaling, he should handily upscale the Mafia goons, the common fodder enemies of the first chapter of the game. In the opening cutscene, a Mafia goon is able to punch through the glass of Hat Kid's ship. Now this feat may not seem very impressive at first, but according to a blueprint found within the ship, this glass is comet-proof, meaning it will withstand the force of a comet crashing into it. And this guy just broke it with a single punch, which was calculated to require around 130 tons of TNT, enough energy to destroy multiple city blocks. Now for an actual feat from Snatcher himself, at the end of the game, Snatcher along with 4 other characters was able to physically stop Hat Kid's spaceship from leaving the planet. Assuming equal effort between these 5 characters, it was found that they'd each be exerting over 45 megatons of TNT to stop the ship, granting city level scaling. And if you think that that's crazy, the AP of the verse undergoes a massive increase when we get to the main collectible of the game, the timepieces. These artifacts are incredibly powerful, with them being shown on multiple occasions to be able to create pocket dimensions called time rifts. In particular, during the final boss fight of the game, Mustache Girl uses the power of dozens of timepieces to create a dimension with stars and nebulae in the background. Then, in the Deathwish DLC, just one Deathwish timepiece is able to create a dimension with the starry sky. On average, creating a starry sky requires almost 17 exafel, enough energy to destroy multiple solar systems. Then, Mustache Girl is empowered by a truckload of timepieces during your fight, and Mustache Girl EX is powered by several Deathwish timepieces, making her upscale these multi-solar system ends. And while Snatcher in base is pretty clearly weaker than Mustache Girl, Snatcher's higher forms, being Snatcher EX and Ultra Snatcher, are at the very least comparable to, likely stronger than both Mustache Girl and Mustache Girl EX. So at best, Snatcher's strongest forms will scale to multi-solar system. Moving on to speed now, Snatcher's scale to Hat Kid. The most relevant feat comes from Act 2, where Hat Kid is able to outspeed electricity that is moving across utility poles. Electricity when moving through wires moves roughly 96% the speed of light. When scaling this to Hat Kid's movements, it's been determined that she can move up to 3.48 times the speed of light, granting Snatcher FTL scaling. At best though, there are some arguments for FTL scaling, as Hat Kid's ship has been calculated to almost 2 million times the speed of light when traveling through space. However, it's very unlikely that anyone scales to this, as Hat Kid doesn't physically pilot it at these speeds, and the ship clearly wasn't moving at top speeds when it was caught up to at the end of the game. Moving on to his hacks and abilities, first of all, Snatcher is a ghost, having an incorporeal body that can phase through pretty much anything, and grants him resistance to hacks that affect a physical body. In fact, he's pretty much untouchable unless turned blue, which can be done by knocking his potions back at him. Speaking of his arsenal, he can summon thousands of potions at once, fire massive laser beams, and summon dozens of minions to attack its foes. He can warp reality, create pocket dimensions, shapeshift, duplicate himself, and even break the fourth wall. His most iconic ability is probably his manipulation of souls, which he doesn't even need a contract to do. He's extremely intelligent too, having been a lord before his death, having ownership over hundreds of souls, and being an extremely manipulative and persuasive character. So overall, Snatcher and base would scale to around city level, with his higher forms reaching multi-solar system level and having relative physics speed.
Wanna make a deal?
So now that we've scaled these two characters, who wins? Let's start with their physical stats. In terms of strength, base Snatcher should scale above game-only Devil, being over 40 times stronger than a feat that the Devil massively upscales. However, taking a look at the Devil's show and comic scaling, base Snatcher quickly gets outclassed. Looking at Snatcher's higher forms though, he scales to a boss using dozens of Deathwish timepieces, while a single Deathwish timepiece gets around 17 exafo. That's a difference of 106 sextillion. Strength and durability goes to Snatcher. And in terms of speed, the difference between the two is pretty clear cut. The Devil is consistently at best massively hypersonic, but Snatcher pretty solidly upscales the FTL feat, making him over 1600 times faster. And this gap only widens if you use the Wank Heart Ends for each character. Snatcher takes speed. With stats done, let's move on to their intelligence and experience. The Devil is pretty blatantly more experienced, being thousands of years old and having ownership of billions of souls, while Snatcher only has ownership of a couple hundred. And while Snatcher might have more formal education, the Devil still should handily take it due to his vast amount of experience. However, they are both incredibly crafty characters, and it's unlikely for either of them to fall for each other's schemes. Still though, the Devil's greater experience gives them a slight edge in this category. Finally, let's look at their hacks and abilities. They have a lot of similar stuff, like energy projectiles, teleportation, etc., but most of that doesn't really matter due to the massive gap in stats. So the real question is, does the Devil have any way to bypass Snatcher's much higher durability? Well, let's first take a look at an ability that's iconic to both characters, their soul manipulation. They can both take people's souls by getting them to sign a contract, can physically interact with souls, and physically take them from people. However, while the Devil has to get close and physically grab a soul, the Snatcher can just telekinetically pop your soul straight out of your body. So at least range-wise, Snatcher seems to have better soul manipulation. Now that we've answered that, how do either of them kill each other? The Devil can regenerate his entire body back in seconds, and the Snatcher is an incorporeal spirit. Well, the Devil's regeneration does seem to have limits, as Cuphead and Mugman were able to injure and defeat him. Thanks to Snatcher's much superior AP, he could likely dish out enough damage to put the Devil down. Even if you don't think that would work for whatever reason though, the Devil's never been shown bouncing back from anything on the level of getting his soul eaten. So devouring his souls are pretty blatant win con for Snatcher. On the other hand, the Devil can't really steal Snatcher's soul, since he literally just is a soul with no physical body. The Devil's soul manipulation would let him interact with and harm Snatcher without needing to turn him blue, but it's not an instant win con like it is for Snatcher. The Devil's smoke that fucking kills you luckily wouldn't be effective against Snatcher either, since it appears to rapidly decay the target's physical body, while Snatcher doesn't really have one of those. Some of his items from the comics could potentially put Snatcher down, but these are heavily situational items that he likely isn't going to be able to use effectively in a fight. Like while the Hellfire Water would likely trap Snatcher, I don't think Snatcher is going to take a break to crack open a cold one with this guy that he's trying to kill. Moving on to Snatcher, he could possibly trap the Devil in a pocket dimension, as while the Devil can teleport, he's never been shown to be able to teleport across dimensions, and the Snatcher can just put him in a pocket dimension, instead of having to trick him into doing something that the Devil has to with his cursed items, giving the Snatcher the edge in terms of pulling off his win cons. So overall, while the Devil is far more experienced, is more skilled, and can bypass Snatcher's intangibility, the Snatcher's vastly superior stats, more useful hacks, and more reliable win cons to give him the win, with low to medium difficulty. But what do y'all think? So anything that is from either side that would change the outcome? Make sure to like, subscribe, and comment if you enjoyed, and feel free to share your thoughts on this video or match suggestions in the comments or in my Discord. But that's all from me today. See ya!